For this segment, we're lucky to be sitting here with William Soraine, VP of Investment at GroupM Canada. Welcome, William. It's great to have you here. I think, for our listeners, it might be really useful, if you may, to orient us in your role and how it connects to audio.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, first off, thank you for having me. It's always nice to be part of an IAB conversation. So thanks for having me. Regarding my role in terms of audio, I mean, let's take a step back. From my perspective, working at GroupM Canada, within my role, we basically look at the media landscape, what has been, forecasting what's to come, looking at the trends, obviously, and obviously looking at these trends and these coming up with these forecasts to help obviously further our clients' business. I mean, our clients basically use us as counsel in terms of media investments. So, I mean, we obviously need to be very careful and forward future looking and future proofing in terms of how we steer their dollars. And in that capacity, we also look at partnerships and capabilities in the landscape, and foster and broker partnerships based on that, in terms of not just what is, but also what is to come. And speaking of audio, in that regard, podcasts falls within this approach that we take.
Thanks for that, William. I think it's important for people to understand, how on the agency side, take a look at media investments as a whole, and then be able to drill down. And I want to start drilling a little bit down into audio and into podcasts, and help me understand from your perspective, has digital audio, have podcasts always been on your radar, or has it been on the radar for a long time, or is it something relatively new?
I wouldn't say it's relatively new. I mean, podcasts have been around for a bit. I mean, obviously, as with any medium, there's an evolution, and podcasts have gone through their evolution and are still undergoing an evolution. Obviously, as the capabilities have evolved in terms of transacting with podcasts and the formats within podcasts, as technology advances, all the capabilities, obviously the traction in terms of usage has gone up. I mean, alongside capabilities, there's also scale, right?
Yes.
There's also content. I mean, podcast began as a smaller bucket, and obviously has grown in terms of the content and the breadth of content. I mean, you can go into podcasts now and look up stuff like farming, hemp farming as an example. I mean, for entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a host of new content, newer content, not necessarily newer content that didn't exist before, whereas initially it might have just been news or, a certain specific niche categories. Now it's broad and niche, albeit, but a broader breadth of these niche types of content.
When you and your team are looking at podcasts and other mediums, specifically online content as well, are there reasons or differentiators on why people consume podcasts versus other types of medium?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as with any kind of medium, there's a tendency to gravitate based on, I mean, predispositions, what you grew up with, whether you're younger and are more, prone to using newer technologies. I mean, there's certain baseline things that I feel are most important. Convenience. I mean, podcast usage. I mean, if you look at MTM reports, predominantly smartphones, primarily 18 to 34 or 36% of Anglophones apparently in Canada are podcast users. 18 to 34 seems to be over 50%. Index is 18 to 34, so younger demographic. And from, I mean, obviously smartphone usage in terms of age groups is there's a correlation there. So there's a convenience aspect, right? I mean, walking your dog, going out for a jog, working out, whatever. Right. So there's a personal, and along with that comes a personal one-to-one connection, because you're picking your content actively versus just kind of passively engaging with something in the background.
Yeah.
You listen to a podcast because you're interested in a specific topic, right? Whether it be economics, wealth building, I don't know, whatever it may be, health.
Sure.
Right. You're actively picking, so you're actively engaged. And inherently, as part of that too, you obviously then develop an association or an affiliation or a closeness with the person on the other end. I mean, it's almost not a dialogue, but it's conversation, right? You feel like you're part of it. You have to be leaned in.
Interesting.
And with other mediums, it's not necessarily that. I don't necessarily want to say one-to-one, but I will, because you're interjecting yourself in part of that, even though you're not speaking back. You're part of that. You're processing. You're taking it in. You're calculating and making decisions or inferences based on that, and that doesn't necessarily happen with other mediums.
Yeah, especially with people listening with earbuds, right? It's sort of that tool to listen to is inside their ears, no one else around them.
Yeah, it's just your one-to-one moment almost.
Exactly. You might be the only one watching a TV show or a sports game, but there's other people in the house that are, walking by or sitting down doing other things that still consume that media passively.
Yeah, correct.
Like you had mentioned. So as podcasts have grown, as the technology to advertise has developed, everything from host-read ads with a website.com/podcast name at the end, call to action, to digital inserted ads, ads inserted while you're streaming a podcast. How do you speak with your clients and your partners when it comes to ads on podcasts and how they might be different or have a different effectiveness than other types of media?
I mean, there's different ways of measuring effectiveness, right? I mean, there's obviously the effectiveness of the brand resonating, and then there's effectiveness as measured by cost too.
Yes.
I mean, studies have shown that podcasts are great at building brand awareness. I mean, it makes sense. Going back to the earlier points about why people listen to podcasts, and the more of the leaned in experience. Not only that, the environment's also inherently less cluttered, right, than some other formats. So when you're on there, your presence is the sole and only presence, right? So therefore, the brand has a better chance of resonating in that period of time. It's also a longer format medium, which means that the brand has more time. I mean, within reason, of course, and depending on what the format is, to project themselves into the mindset of the user. So in terms of counseling clients and speaking to them in terms of the type of format, it's primarily positioned as an awareness driver, albeit that there are mechanisms and technologies in place to track attribution, right? So I mean, that's essentially the forward foot, and one of the key reasons the brands clients tend to engage with podcasts.
Yeah. Will, you're also speaking to it. I'm hearing you say, you know, almost at least the way that I'll summarize it and kind of throw it back out is this the role that audio and specifically podcasts in this conversation, the role that podcasts play in the overall kind of media mix. And I'm curious, how is that evolving? And if so, how?
So I mean, from a execution standpoint, baseline, anytime there's a new medium, not to say that podcast is a new medium, let's
Sure.
call it an emerging medium, right? Because it's already
Sure.
exists,
Yeah.
it's evolving, right? As part of that evolution, as part of clients and their target audience base, right? People that are engaging with their brand. Sorry, boardroom conflicts.
Happens.
People engaging with target audiences, people engaging with the brand. Obviously, you want to go for the channels that that have a higher propensity for your audience to engage with, right? So obviously, podcasts, given that they're, like I said, an emerging, evolving capability or platform channel, that does form part of the mix. I mean, sometimes what happens is brands tend to look for, okay, what is the lowest hanging fruit from a cost perspective? Because
Sure.
despite it being awareness, I mean, they're also looking for reach, for scale, right?
Sure.
Brands are also constrained from a spend perspective. So sometimes that has to be factored in. Albeit, having said that, podcasts do also, to be fair, are also from a cost efficiency perspective, relatively more cost efficient than, you know, some other online capabilities. I mean, such as video, connected TV as an example.
Yeah.
And is that from a CPM standpoint or a, you know, cost of development standpoint, or both?
I'd say a bit of both. I mean, from
Yeah.
a CPM perspective, for sure, right? I mean, from a development perspective, also, you need to consider that the podcast environment, the format's a little different. I mean, if you're going into branded sessions or host reads and stuff like that, you want to be more one-to-one in your communication versus, you know, an impression-based buy where a radio spot is just kind of overlaid into or just parked into a podcast spot. Not that it can't be done, but depending on the type of execution you're going with. So a bit of both CPM and, you know, development efficiencies.
Yeah.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, you know, with your role, you're helping your clients understand how, you know, different media channels are developing. You're working with GroupM to uncover opportunities as it pertains to investments. Are you seeing any, is you and your team seeing any emerging trends or best practices around advertising in the podcast and audio space?
Yeah, I mean, there's, from a trend perspective, one of the things I touched on earlier, the attribution piece. I mean, it's being tested as some players that have come into the space. I know, like ACAST as an example, has a global partnership with an attribution partner. I believe they're Podscribe, and they bake it into, you know, their overall buy. So I mean, attribution is something that's being tested and worked on, integrated as part of an overall mix. But I mean, overall, I think some of the key precepts need to be followed. You need your solid baseline, and from your baseline, you deviate into other things. The baseline being, you know, what works for awareness.
Yeah.
So do that well, right? Because even within awareness capabilities, they've got integrations that are evolving too in terms of the capabilities there. So you want to make sure you're doing that well. And other emerging trends, as an example, is 3D audio. As an example, I mean,
Good one.
also is not just a straight plug and play kind of thing. There's production requirements. Not only that, I mean,
Sure.
on the user end, you need capabilities as well. So it's nice to play around with it and try and match it to whatever content you're aligning your podcast with, or
Hmm.
whichever podcast content you're aligning it with. But I mean, these are some of the trends and best practices that I'd call it.
Mhm. William, just as an extension to that, like this, if we think about, you're thinking about, podcasts as still this kind of emerging medium. Is this being reflected in the conversations that you're having with your partners? Is there maybe less hesitancy as than, the time that podcasts first hit, decades ago when it first kind of hit, because there's now more scale, there's more content. Well, also appreciating, I know that there'll be always early, mid, and late adopters, but I'm also curious if the conversations that you're having around podcasts with your clients is also evolving as well, if they're emerging, if I may say, as well.
Absolutely. I mean, clients are absolutely well versed in the landscape, right? And you always get a lot of questions, and not just questions. You also get a lot of participation and involvement in terms of the media channel, right? I mean, it's not just a one-way thing. We're partners with our clients as well, right? Not just with the partners and publishers out there.
Right.
And there are clients, within our roster of clients that are more proactive and more eager in terms of testing, not just testing of being, growing their podcast presence.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, I mean, it needs to be looked at as with the overall mix, and obviously clients are conscious of dollars.
Yeah.
Podcasts, like I said, inherently come with, from a best practice perspective, certain production requirements,
Mhm.
right? In terms of, being more effective. So clients obviously consider that, but yes, absolutely, they're going that way as well. I mean, we've also seen within our roster of clients more spend going toward podcasts, and
Yeah.
that is growing. I mean, that's certainly an avenue that'll continue to be expanded on for forecasting over the next few years. I mean, as with anything, things end up stabilizing at some point.
Yeah,
But I
sure.
mean, I think podcasts do have a ways to go because
Hmm.
the usage is growing. I mean, as I mentioned, from a demographic perspective, 18 to 34-year-olds are, from a Canadian perspective, seem
Yeah.
to be a key demographic. As they get older and as you get a new cohort of 18 to 34-year-olds, there's always a transference too, right? So
Yeah. And I'm also thinking about what does newcomers look like in that as well? Is this
Hmm.
that's also maybe rising, and not we don't have to answer that now, but there's so
I
many
can. I
new
almost thought that was a plug.
there's these nuances though, right? And it's good to hear that there's movement, and that there's movement with, sure, investment, but also in the conversations that you're having. It sounds like there's also this emerging conversation that you're having equally with your clients as well, which is nice to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, clients are obviously very well versed in the landscape, right? Which is why a partnership is important, because we use each other to build on each other and to push each other forward, right?
Yeah.
So any kind of emerging trends, mediums, we're obviously engaged in, very actively questioned, analyzed, explored.
Yeah.
And I don't want to underestimate the importance of that partnership either, right? Like that's so
Absolutely.
integral to this piece as well. Sorry, Karim.
No, I just wanted to ask you, Will, you talked about, podcasting. Podcasts have a way to go still. I'm curious where, if you could put your crystal ball on your desk there and forecast in the future, where do you see podcasting going as it pertains to the media mix and media investment?
Mm.
I mean, look, obviously we know that there are some traditional channels that are suffering, right? On account of internet usage growth and podcast audio streaming in general, not just podcasts, is growing, and as part of that overall audio podcast mix. I mean, if I were to reference, to be so bold as to reference the IAB 2022 digital report, I mean, podcasts are, I believe, as of the last report, around 40% of the overall mix, and then that mix in itself is growing. I mean, we're anticipating double-digit growth in audio streaming, over the next few years. And along with that, as I mentioned, as podcast capabilities grow through the technology, through ad verification, through attribution, we anticipate that growing as well.
William, thank you so much for this. This has been a great conversation. Sorry, Laura, did you have one more?
No, I mean, you
Okay.
beat me
Come
to
on,
the
Laura.
reference, Will. You beat me to the ad revenue survey reference. So thank you for that. I mean, look, I think that I could continue to talk and ask you more questions, but we can stop there and rather say we look forward to talking with you again and kind of, carrying on this conversation.
Absolutely, anytime. Happy to. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.